Hey, what is going on, everyone, and welcome back to the channel, and welcome to lesson 5 of the Kotlin YouTube series for the Android platform. Now, I think this series has been going by a lot faster than I had originally expected, and we should be able to wrap up this entire series in probably 2 or maybe 3 more lessons. So hopefully you guys have been enjoying it so far, and I just hope you have been learning a lot about the Kotlin programming language. Again, it does take a little bit of time to get used to. Just stick with it and you should be okay. All right, so having said that, let's move on to the crucial part of today's lesson, which is to learn about how we can kind of pass data from one activity to another so that our application is much more dynamic, right? So let me kind of show you where we left off in the last video. And basically we are using a recycler view to render out a list of videos for our homepage, right? And if we click into it, all of these activities for the course detail, they're all the same. And if I click on the second item, you just get this static list of items. Now let me tab over to the final product here, and notice when I click on the Instagram Firebase course, we have all of the lessons that are related to that course. And if we click on the intermediate training course, we only have 4 items like that. And then finally, at the very last item on the list, we have the Kindle basic training course that only has 1 lesson. So I want to show you how we can modify our application so that we can pass information from one screen to the next, kind of like that. So let's go ahead and begin with Android Studio right now. And we are back inside of good old Android Studio, and our project is currently loaded on the left side. And let me start off today's video by running our current piece of code to show you where we left off in the last video. So here we are inside of our vertical list. This is our main activity. And if we click onto one of these items, we are loading the course detail activity, which is this class on the left side. And if you can kind of remember from the last video, the clicking behavior of this in the main activity is actually implemented inside of main adapter inside of this class called custom view holder. So you see inside of here, we set up something called onClickListener, and we also construct this intent, which is having a type of course detail activity. And this is the way that you specify a type inside of Kotlin. And then finally, we start the activity using view context. And that's how we render out this page like you see over there. So click on there, we get the same exact thing. And the first thing I would like to show you how to actually do in today's lesson is how we can pass information from one activity, for example, main, and pass it into course detail. And the easiest way to demonstrate how this works is to kind of show you first how to change the course detail title at the very top. In other words, let's go back to the final product. If I click into basic training, we see it at the very top. If we click into intermediate training, we see that title changes as well. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. And the way we're going to do this is actually very, very easy inside of Android. You just have to modify your onClickListener so that you can pass some data into this intent object. And so it might be a little confusing at first, but let me show you how it works by calling something that is putExtra. And this requires you to pass in a name value pair of objects. So for example, you can say this name thing over there. And then for the value, this is actually your course title object to pass. And this is going to actually go from one page to the next. So how do we actually use this inside of the next page of course detail activity? Well, you just have to go inside of course detail activity, go all the way up to the onCreate method, and then somewhere down here, let's see, we'll change the nav bar, bar title, and it's very easy, right? So all you have to do is access the intent object again from the course detail activity. And you can say get extra, so get string extra like so. And you need to use the same name that you passed into the putExtra call. So go back to the main adapter, and this name over here, this name thing, you have to use that in course detail activity. So just paste that in there, but as a string instead. And then this will be the nav bar title equals that. And then finally, to actually set the nav bar title to be something like this on the very top, you want to access the actual support action bar. So the very top thing is an action bar in the Android world of things. So finally, you call title equals navbar title. And because this support action bar is an optional, you just want to make sure you specify a question mark like that. And with that being kind of placed inside of our onCreate, we can finally run our code to show the actual title at the very top. So course title, object to pass. That very long piece of string is just that over there. So obviously you don't want to pass this as your course title. And before we move on to accessing the correct title, let me show you something that you can do to improve this bit of code here. And the idea is you don't want to use this kind of hard-coded string everywhere. So instead, I'm going to provide something called a companion object inside of Kotlin. And I'm not exactly sure why they call it companion object, but inside of here, I'm going to specify a couple of constant static strings. And the first one will be the actual, let's see, video title key equals some kind of string, right? Video underscore title. That seems to make sense to me. And I'll use this video title as the name key now inside of there. And so you can just access these companion objects. So video title appears inside of the autocomplete. And now we would like to go inside of, let's see, course detail activity. And we will use the name key properly. So get string extra. We will use custom view holder dot video title key. That way your code isn't as brittle, it isn't as error prone. So for example, you can just modify this video title key in one place. So let me just command click into it. It takes you back to custom view holder. And this guy is just one static string. So really good stuff there. You click inside, you get your course title object at the very top. All right, so now that we have that bit of logic kind of in place there, we would like to also pass in the correct video kind of title or the course title, whatever you want to call that thing at the very top. In other words, I would like to pass in Instagram Firebase or intermediate training core data to the very next page. And the way that you do that is to actually customize your custom view holder to include the video object somehow. And let me show you how I'm going to do this. And the way this works is I'm going to modify this custom constructor for this view holder class to include a var video of video type like that. And I want to default this to some kind of null value, and it's going to be an optional as well. And then what I will do next is I'm going to modify on bind view holder, this piece of logic, so that whenever I am setting up the view, so this is my view holder, every time I scroll up and down the list, we're kind of refreshing the view with something new. And during that process, I'm going to modify holder now, and you can say video to be something. So our holder, which is this thing, is type custom view holder. It now has a kind of publicly accessible video object on it. And you can just simply set it equal to this video on line 33, which you retrieve from getting it through the position in the list. Hopefully that makes sense. And finally, you need a question mark over there because the holder is an optional. And so once you have that set up inside of on bind view holder, you simply need to access video inside of this bit of logic. And it's very easy. Just remove that string and say video, which is now a variable in your holder class, and just say name, which is the name over there. And obviously, because this is an optional, you want to use a question mark, and I'm going to rerun my app one more time. And that's going to get our app to click on that. We get Instagram Firebase, and then down below we get intermediate training. And again, we get the same thing with the Kindle basic training course, kind of like that. So really good stuff. Okay, now as you can kind of tell, that wasn't too hard, right? You just have to get used to the way Android works, and everything should be fairly simple and straightforward. All right, so let's move on to actually rendering out a completely different list, kind of like what we are seeing inside of our final product. So in other words, I would like to click on this guy and render out just 4 lessons for intermediate training course. And all the way up above, we have Instagram Firebase, which gives us a much longer list of lessons, kind of like that. And then finally, we have the Kindle Basic Training course, which only has one lesson. So the question is, how exactly does this work, and how do we actually get the list of items to be completely different? Well, for our kind of home feed API, notice how we have an ID for each one of our videos. So Instagram Firebase is ID 1, ID 2, and then 3 for the basic training. And on another different API call, we can provide the ID of 3 or 2, gets us a different list, or even ID of 1, which will get us the Instagram Firebase course lessons inside of this very, very long list. So this is the API call that we're going to use. It is this address, YouTube course detail ID 1. So let me copy this inside of my bit of code first. And why don't we head into course detail activity, and where we are getting the navbar title, we're going to also construct this feed URL, or this course detail URL rather. And let's just say course detail URL equals something, right? So let me paste in that string that we were using before, course detail. And all we have to do is kind of modify this one value somehow. So the way we're going to do that is to pass in the, let's see, course video ID as well. So instead of just passing the video title like that, we're also going to pass in an integer. So intent.put extra. And let me use a val up here, val video ID key equals, I don't know, video ID, seems to make sense. And let's use video ID. And then video has a property on it called ID like that. And make sure you use a question mark. Finally, we can access this extra name value pair instead of course detail activity by saying val, and we'll say video ID equals get the intent, get the int extra because we're now using an integer as that value. And we can say custom view holder.video ID key. Right, so the thing about get int extra is you want to provide a default value if you don't have anything available inside of your intent object. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. And now that we have the video ID, we can remove this one value and just add it onto the string with video ID like that, and you should be okay. So let me just print out what course detail URL is at the very end there. So instead of using print, I believe we should use println instead. And so with that change, I'm going to rerun my application. And down below, we're going to see the course detail URL being printed out down here. So you see ID equals 1. And if I go back to hitting the second item, you are going to see ID equals 2 like that. So that's kind of how we modify the course detail URL. And we are ready to actually fetch our course lesson objects right now. All right, so the fetch JSON call is actually really similar to what we did in the very first couple of lessons of main activity. So I'm going to write out this code rather quickly of, let's see, fetch JSON, which is going to be a private method call, which I have down below as private function fetch JSON like that. And let me just remove that print statement because I don't want to actually use it. And inside of the fetch JSON call, I'm going to construct my course detail URL. And what I'm going to do now is to create my client first. So client equals OK HTTP client. And we did this in the last couple of lessons, so you should be familiar with what I'm doing here. So client, we want to make this URL request to actually get the data from this URL. And the way you would do this is to say new call with some kind of request object, which is request, request, and then builder. I think we need to say URL. For the string, we say course detail URL. And then finally, we just build this to get our request object that we pass inside of this new call like that. And then in order to actually execute this client request, we are going to use enqueue, which puts it on a background thread so that your UI can be responsive as you make this URL fetch. So inside of here is the tricky part of Kotlin. And in order to specify this callback properly, you have to say object, and then you say callback like so, and you just brace. And inside of here, you just say on failure, just in case your URL fails, you can remove that bit of code. And finally, you have to say on response for when your activity or when your request finishes, giving you back your response. So again, you can access a body parameter on response.body and then just call string like that. So make sure you don't call toString and just use regular string, which gives you your body string. And this is an optional. The body is also an optional. And then finally, you can just print ln of the body string down below. So let me just run this again, and you kind of see how the fetch JSON is really easy if you have this OK HTTP client and just construct your requests. So let me click into the top guy, and you see down here are all these objects that are related to my Firebase course. So for example, that piece of JSON is actually what you're seeing inside of this API call. So create registration screen, Firebase SDK, that's all available in here. So that's, and also that. So that's pretty good. And now we're just kind of ready to use some JSON deserialization to get our objects. So these are actually course lesson objects. So it has name. So let me bring back this, might be a little easier. Name, duration, number, URL, and link. So let me kind of do this relatively quickly by showing you how to parse these objects by going into our models KT file. So we have home feed, video, and channel. And we just want another class called course lesson and have a constructor like that. So I just pasted in the JSON that was in the browser. And we're going to use these couple of properties that we set up with, val name string, val duration string, like so, and then val the lesson number, which is an int, val, what do we have, image, URL of type string, and then finally val link is also type string. So pretty easy, you just have to type all of that out. Can be a little bit tedious from time to time, but that's how we have to set up our model objects. So course lesson is over there. We want to go back to the course detail page. And upon the response of our kind of URL from course detail, we just have to say, let's see, what do we want to do? Val JSON equals JSON builder. So where are you, JSON builder? And I believe we have to call something like .create like that. And we will use JSON again to parse out all of our JSON objects. So for example, JSON has something called from JSON with some kind of string and a type. And let me see what I actually want to use. You can remove those two brackets. And the string we have to pass in is this body string like that. And the confusing part is the actual type that we need to use. So I don't think we want that print line anymore. And so for this API, we're actually returning a list of course lessons. So you kind of see the list starting out with this bracket over there. And we're going to use an array of course lessons. So this is a typical type of response that you'll get back from a REST API. And I just wanted to show you how to parse this type of response instead of a completely different type of class. So the type object is actually going to be an array of course lesson objects. And this, you have to specify a type. So instead of Kotlin, this is how you specify the array of course lesson type, like so. So this is actually your course lessons equals all of that. And in order to actually see exactly what is in your course lessons, I would like to put a breakpoint in line 57. And I'm going to click into one of these guys. So click on that. It's going to fetch everything and then deserialize or parse all of your JSON objects into course lessons. So down here is my course lesson object. You can open it up. You see I have a bunch of these course lesson objects now inside of the array. So we have name, we have link, image URL, and duration. And all of that looks different for every item inside of your list now. So that's kind of how we parse our objects from the JSON URL. Okay, so that's going to wrap it up for today's video on how to pass objects from one page to the next. And this is actually a pretty important concept because obviously a lot of Android applications have a lot of different pages. So once you learn how to do this, you should be able to build out a fairly complicated application for the Android platform. And again, if you want to download the source code, find the link in the description below. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and also subscribe to the channel if you want more lessons on this series. That's going to be it for me today. I'll see you guys in the next lesson. Bye bye.